Good morning, distinguished participants, CEO Lee, Chairman Hong, President Kim. I'm very pleased to have been invited by News1 to address the News1 Future Forum 2024 as the new president of the Korea Economic Institute of America, which has as its purpose educating Americans about Korea. If I may take just a moment, one of the main reasons that I decided to take this job at this moment is that the U.S.-Korea relationship is touching more Americans individually and personally than ever before. And most of those interactions are positive and forward-looking, powered by chips, batteries, and clean technology rather than forged in the crucible of sacrifice and shared historical memory in the context of the Korean War. This audience knows well the American security and foreign policy influence on South Korea, which is long and deep. But going the other way, Americans may barely notice that increasingly the machines that we use, the movies and TV shows that we watch, and the food that we eat are bringing us closer to Korea, and that Korea is becoming a bigger part of American life. And so at KEI, we are trying to explain to Americans why the relationship with Korea matters and what it means, as well as to support a deeper and more vibrant U.S.-Korea relationship. And we're grateful to partner with the Korean government and American colleagues as we pursue those objectives. Today, I want to talk about the impact of ideology, institutionalization of alliance cooperation, and the growing convergence of strategic interests that underpin the U.S.-Korea relationship. Then I will analyze how the U.S. presidential election outcome is likely to influence the security and economic cooperation within the U.S.-Korea alliance. And just to provide a spoiler, I agree with what Minister of Trade Chung just said, that the alliance is likely to endure, and I'm glad to hear that the South Korean government is preparing for the outcome, whatever it may be. First, on the issue of ideology in the United States and its influence on the U.S.-Korea relationship. The critical divisions, in my view, that threaten the U.S.-Korea relationship are not partisan, but they are rather determined by a combination of partisan politics and exclusive nationalism. What are the main factors that determine whether an administration in either South Korea or the United States is alliance first or America first or Korea first? I think the main criterion is simple, and that is whether or not an administration, either in the United States or South Korea, place its own interests above the interests of alliance-based cooperation. In the United States, on the Republican side, there have traditionally been Republican globalists, even neoconservatives, who have jealously guarded America's leadership role and sought an expansive effort to influence countries in our own image. But more recently, we have seen the emergence, or more precisely, the re-emergence from Republicans in the 1930s of an America First approach to the world that has advocated for retrenchment and prioritized an American-centric leadership in global affairs, driven by a strict and more narrow cost-benefit analysis of the U.S. return on investment for its contributions to global security. On the Democratic side, there is also a long-standing critique that America's foreign entanglements have diverted resources necessary to address domestic issues like poverty, racial disparities, and other manifestations of social inequality. In this context, it makes sense that the United States would exercise leadership not as a sole provider of international security goods, but as a first among equals and as a leader of coalitions of the willing. The United States is no longer a hegemonic actor in global affairs or the global economy, but rather a dominant market facing competition in a world characterized by a broader and more multilateral distribution of wealth and resources. Instead, the U.S. can lead as a mobilizer of like-minded, capable partners who are also making contributions in support of global stability and opposing those who prefer might makes right over upholding the rule of law. But as the U.S. has attempted to circumscribe and prioritize its global role and contributions, there has also emerged in the U.S. political debate an America First strain of isolationism that on the one hand justifies the inward turn by arguing that we should not provide charity to other countries, heedless of gaining returns, and that on the other hand points to a host of domestic political needs and problems that should take pride of place in American funding priorities, that we should spend more on domestic prosperity and less on national defense. America First ideology on either side of the U.S. political spectrum can impinge on American willingness to prioritize cooperation within the U.S.-South Korea alliance. Under the Trump administration, the South Korean concern was a transactional approach to burden sharing. In the Biden administration, it has been protectionist language in the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. On the South Korean side, there are also Korea First tendencies that can lead to a prioritization of narrow interests over cooperation within the U.S.-South Korea alliance from both the left and the right. Some South Korean progressives have in the past called for a North Korea First approach that prioritizes brotherhood over cooperation within the alliance in pursuit of reconciliation with North Korea. Some South Korean conservatives have recently argued that the need for nuclear parity with North Korea may provide justification for setting aside the alliance due to doubts over the credibility of U.S. security guarantees on which South Korea has depended for over 7 decades. My main point here is that ideological challenges to the health of the U.S.-Korea relationship are not determined by political partisanship, and that either side in both the U.S. and South Korea can be tempted by the lure of exclusive nationalism to threaten our mutually beneficial cooperation. Now, what has been happening in the U.S.-Korea alliance relationship? During the last 3 years, the level of policy coordination between our two governments has grown dramatically as our governments have more closely linked our respective policy approaches to each other. Over a dozen new dialogues have been created between our two governments on a wide range of issues, from the Nuclear Consultation Group to deal with coordination in response to North Korea's growing nuclear threat and other dimensions of security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, to bilateral economic dialogues on supply chain resiliency and the shared challenge of sourcing critical minerals. We're cooperating more closely to address shared cybersecurity challenges, to promote space cooperation, and to meet our mutual energy needs. A national security advisor-led dialogue on critical and emerging technologies is enabling science and technologies from both countries to pool their skills in pursuit of joint research and development in critical sectors like semiconductors, quantum, and AI. We are also expanding coordinated policies following the Camp David summit among the U.S., Japan, and South Korea to work together trilaterally on shared security and economic challenges in the region. Deeper institutionalization of coordination between our two governments should make our cooperation with each other more resilient, though it will face challenges without strong political leadership in both the United States and South Korea in support of such cooperation. As South Korea's level of investment in the United States has grown, the relationship is also becoming stronger because there is a greater sense of mutuality. Alongside long-standing U.S. security guarantees to South Korea, there is a flow of economic benefits from inward investment by South Korean companies to the United States, enhancing a sense of mutuality in the relationship. And by the way, as Minister of Trade Chung mentioned, a significant portion of new South Korean investment is occurring in red states where new jobs, many of them in batteries and clean tech, are being created in ways that should enhance the long-term durability of the alliance, regardless of American political crosscurrents. Now, the institutionalization of this expanded cooperation within the U.S.-South Korea alliance has, in my view, been built on the third factor I want to address, and that is the steadily growing convergence of shared interests within the U.S.-South Korea alliance. South Korea's role in the global economy underscores its interest in global stability and in cooperation with the United States as the leader of the liberal international order based on the rule of law. South Korea has stepped up in recent years in proportion to its increasing capabilities to partner with the United States, not only on the peninsula, but also regionally and globally as a growing contributor to international public goods and as a natural partner and technology leader in so many sectors critical to U.S. interests. And I would highlight the significant new investments that the South Korean government is making in the sphere of international development, which is an area that is always in need of additional resources. Our shared sense of threat from North Korea's unchecked nuclear development and China's Sino-centric and increasingly aggressive challenge to the regional security and economic order has underscored the rationale for closer and more greatly expanded U.S.-South Korea coordination to defend both our territories from revisionist threats and to uphold our core values. Now, what about the impact of the U.S. election on U.S.-South Korean security and economic cooperation? After all, that is the hot topic, the number one topic that I hear about from South Koreans these days. And I've made a case for the durability of the alliance regardless of the outcome of the U.S. elections, but this does not mean that the U.S. election will have a limited impact on the direction and trajectory of the U.S.-Korea relationship. In fact, I believe the election will have a major impact on the priorities and issues that are going to require management within the relationship, depending on whether we see a second Biden administration or a second Trump administration. And so I want to outline the main differences that I project between the two possibilities. On the security front, we see possible contrasts between the Biden and Trump administrations on how to manage extended deterrence, on how to manage policy toward North Korea, and on the importance of embedding the U.S.-South Korea alliance in a broader multilateral lattice work of institutions or of managing cooperation bilaterally apart from other forms of regional cooperation. On the issue of extended deterrence, a second Biden administration is likely to continue to strengthen extended deterrence commitments to South Korea, especially through the implementation of the Washington Declaration and the Nuclear Consultative Group. The two governments have been working closely with each other to talk about nuclear planning and to give South Korea a stronger stake in the process of thinking about how nuclear weapons might be used or to defend against North Korea's nuclear threat. A second Trump administration might be more interested in seeing South Korea taking a greater responsibility for its own defense, possibly including a return to transactional demands for burden sharing, and also a possibly greater tolerance for South Korea to play a greater role in the development of a nuclear dimension of the defense relationship. On the issue of North Korea, the Trump administration may be less predictable than the Biden administration in its efforts to reestablish contacts with Kim Jong-un. But it remains very unclear whether Kim Jong-un will reciprocate any effort by President Trump because their respective immediate political needs are very different from where they were 5 years ago. On the issue of U.S.-Japan-South Korea relations, a second Biden administration will continue to strengthen its post-Camp David initiatives, but it is not clear whether a second Trump administration will support and sustain such initiatives or revert completely to bilateralism in its approaches to Tokyo and Seoul. Another wild card in this respect will be the type of personal relationship that might develop between President Yoon and President Trump. Now, as regards the impact on the economic relationship, I think the economic relationship may pose an even bigger challenge than the security relationship in terms of alliance coordination, given the fact that there are dramatic differences in economic policy approaches between Trump and Biden. A second Biden administration will likely continue its small yard, high fence approach to economic security and will continue to work on supply chain resiliency and industrial policy very closely with South Korean partners. It's very clear that the Biden administration sees South Korea as an important technology partner, and that area of the relationship is deepening and growing. A second Biden administration's emphasis on reshoring and friendshoring would continue, as will continued interest in expanding South Korean inward investment in the United States. A second Trump administration is more likely to increase the role of tariffs in U.S. economic policy. President Trump has indicated that he might apply a 10% across-the-board tariff to imports to the United States. And he may extend aspects of the small yard, high fence, and technology, possibly in ways that might impinge on exceptions for South Korean companies to exports of semiconductor-related items to South Korean plants in China, and in ways that might threaten the aspects of South Korean investment in the United States, including the possibility of a de-emphasis of clean tech as part of a broader U.S. energy policy. And the issues that I would really point to there are related to President Trump's position on the Japanese bid to purchase U.S. steel. And his opposition to that suggests that there's a limit to his desire to see major foreign investments, especially in areas that threaten U.S.-made products. And then also, as regards the Trump administration's approach to China, it's likely to be potentially tougher, and it would basically mean that the exceptions that Samsung and SK Hynix currently enjoy as related to support for its plants in China could potentially be endangered. As regards energy policy, President Trump is likely to de-emphasize clean tech, but I think that it's unlikely that he would be able to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act would remain in place, but it's likely that the pace of growth in the renewable sector would be slowed, and that might impinge on some of the big bets that South Korea has made in terms of its inward investment. And then finally, a Trump administration is, I think, certain to focus on the $45 million merchandise trade surplus that South Korea has by exerting great pressure on the South Korean government to bring the bilateral trade relationship back into balance. So to summarize, while I expect that the U.S.-South Korea relationship to remain vibrant and multifaceted, the forms, types, and levels of cooperation and the areas of potential conflict that require active management may shift depending on whether Trump or Biden wins a second term. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.